Picture this. You are standing by a fire. It is 30,000 years before right now. You are somewhere in the frozen expanse of Ice Age Eurasia. The cold is the kind of cold that hurts your lungs when you breathe. You have no walls, no alarm system, no phone, no police to call. All you have is a wooden spear, a tribe of 20 exhausted people sleeping behind you, and the flickering light of a campfire pushing back against a pitch-black, endless wilderness. And out there in the dark, something is moving. You hear the snow crunch. You hear a heavy, low breath. And then, just at the edge of the firelight, you see them. Eyes. Yellow, unblinking eyes reflecting the flames. A pack of apex predators, grey wolves. Each one weighs over 100 pounds, possesses bone-crushing jaw strength, and is entirely capable of tearing you apart in the dark. You tighten your grip on your spear. Your heart is hammering in your throat. You are terrified. They are terrified of you. You are enemies, locked in a brutal competition for the exact same scarce meat in a frozen, unforgiving world. But here is the question nobody actually asks. How do we get from that exact moment, that terrifying standoff in the snow, to right now? Look around your living room. Right now, there is a very high chance that the distant descendant of that massive, terrifying Ice Age predator is currently asleep on your couch, wearing a ridiculous knitted sweater, and twitching its paws because it is dreaming about chasing a tennis ball. And you are about to say, well, we tamed them, we caught them and trained them. Not so fast. I am not talking about how we selectively bred pugs to have flat faces in the 1800s. I am talking about the absolute beginning, the bridge across the abyss. How do two species that naturally want to kill each other suddenly decide to share a living space? Is there a conscious spark of a treaty in there? Did we conquer them, or did they infiltrate us? What if the story we have been telling ourselves for centuries is completely backwards, and we never actually tamed the wolf at all? And this is the rabbit hole we are going down today. Buckle up, because the scientific evidence for what actually happened genuinely melts your brain. Let's start at the very beginning. What does it even mean to tame a wild beast? Let's start with the most obvious thing, the story we all grew up with. You know the myth. We have seen it in a dozen movies and 100 children's books. A brave ancient hunter is walking through the forest, finds a helpless orphaned wolf cub, feels a pang of pity, and brings it back to the cave. The humans feed it, pet it, raise it alongside their own children, and eventually, the grateful wolf grows up to become man's loyal hunting companion. It is a beautiful story of human mastery and benevolence. And according to evolutionary biologists like Raymond Coppinger, who spent decades studying canine origins, it is also complete biological nonsense. Here is why. A wild wolf is not a dog waiting to be discovered. A wild wolf is a wild wolf. Even today, if you take a newborn wolf cub from the wild and raise it in a human home, bottle feed it, and cuddle it every single day, something very specific happens when it hits puberty. At around 8 to 10 weeks old, the wild genetic programming kicks in. It stops looking at you as a parent and starts looking at you as either competition or a threat. It becomes incredibly destructive, deeply territorial, and highly reactive. Its predatory instincts switch on, and it does not care about your treats, your commands, or the fact that you paid its veterinary bills. You cannot simply love the wild out of an animal. Now, teleport back to an ancient hunter-gatherer camp. These humans were living on the razor's edge of starvation. They had no fences, no leashes, no cages, and absolutely no dog food. Every ounce of meat was precious. Why on earth would a starving human tribe waste perfectly good meat to feed a highly dangerous, rapidly growing predator that was biologically destined to challenge them for dominance the moment it grew up? A captive wolf in a camp full of human toddlers is not a pet. It is a ticking time bomb. If a caveman actually tried to raise a wild wolf cub, the experiment would likely end with a dead baby and a dead wolf. So, if the brave hunter did not adopt a puppy, how did it happen? So here is where it gets interesting, and a little insulting to our human egos. If we didn't domesticate the wolf, who did? The leading theory in modern science, championed by researchers like evolutionary anthropologist Brian Hare at Duke University, is known as the self-domestication hypothesis. In short, The wolves domesticated themselves, and they did it for the most unromantic reason possible: garbage. Imagine that ancient human camp again. Humans are messy. Where humans go, trash follows. We left behind piles of animal bones, scraps of tough meat, rotting fish, and, eventually, human waste. To a wild wolf in the freezing ice age, a human camp was basically an all-you-can-eat buffet. But there was a catch. The buffet was surrounded by the most dangerous, spear-throwing, fire-wielding apes on the planet. In the wild, every animal has something called a flight distance. It is the minimum distance an animal will keep between itself and a threat before it panics and runs away. For a normal wild wolf, that flight distance is huge. At the slightest smell of human smoke or the snap of a twig, the wolf bolts. That is survival instinct. But evolution is a numbers game, and in every population there are variations. A few wolves, just by random genetic luck, had a slightly lower flight distance. They were just a tiny bit less afraid. Maybe they were a little lazier, or a little braver, or just really, really hungry. While the aggressive, highly fearful wolves stayed deep in the forest starving, these slightly friendlier, slightly bolder wolves crept closer to the edge of the firelight. They waited for the humans to fall asleep, and then they scavenged the bones. Think about what happens next. The bolder wolves get more calories. More calories mean they survive the harsh winter. Surviving the winter means they have more puppies. And those puppies inherit their parents' slightly less fearful genetics. Over generations, a new population begins to splinter off from the main wolf pack. These are wolves that do not hunt elk in the deep woods. They hunt human garbage. They are the scavengers. We didn't choose them. They chose us. They realized that if they just stopped acting so scary, the hairless apes would drop free food. It was the invention of begging. And it was the most successful evolutionary strategy in the history of the animal kingdom. Let me throw you something even wilder. It is one thing to hang around a camp eating garbage. Raccoons do that. Rats do that. We didn't domesticate rats into our best friends. To go from a scavenger to a companion, something had to change inside the brain. A biological bridge had to be built between their species and ours. And the wolves that stayed built that bridge using the most powerful weapon in the mammalian arsenal: love chemistry. Back in 2015, a team of researchers led by Takafumi Kikusui at Azabu University in Japan published a study that honestly breaks my brain every time I think about it. They wanted to know what happens in the brains of dogs and humans when they look at each other. In the wild, eye contact is an act of war. If a wolf stares at another wolf, it means, I am going to kill you or you are going to submit. Wild wolves do not gaze lovingly into each other's eyes. It is a threat display. But dogs? Dogs stare at us all the time. Kikusui's team brought humans and their dogs into a lab, took urine samples to measure their hormone levels, and then just let them interact for 30 minutes. Some dogs and owners stared into each other's eyes for a long time. Others didn't. When they tested the hormone levels afterward, the results were staggering. The humans and dogs who stared into each other's eyes experienced a massive spike in a hormone called oxytocin. The dog's oxytocin levels rose by 130%. The humans' oxytocin levels shot up by 300%. If you don't know what oxytocin is, it is the love hormone. It is the exact same chemical that floods a human mother's brain when she looks into the eyes of her newborn baby. It is the biological glue that creates maternal bonding, empathy, and absolute devotion. Read that again. Well, hear it again. The dog is looking at you, and your brain is chemically registering it as your own human child. The researchers then tried the exact same experiment with wolves that had been raised by humans from birth. The wolves simply refused to make eye contact. And there was zero oxytocin spike. None. At some point in the deep past, those scavenger wolves hanging around the fire mutated a behavior. They stopped using eye contact as a threat and started using it as a plea. They hijacked the human maternal instinct. They hacked our biological hardware. The wolf learned to look at the ape, and the ape's brain flooded with the chemical that said, "You must protect this creature with your life." Yes, exactly that. We think we trained them to sit and stay. They chemically hypnotized us into feeding them for the next 30,000 years. Honestly, respect. And you are about to say, come on, that is just a behavioral trick. It is a reflex. It doesn't mean the animal actually changed. Okay, then explain this. How did they physically change? How do we get from a massive, terrifying grey predator with stiff ears and a straight tail to a floppy-eared, spotted, tail-wagging golden retriever? You would think that requires deliberate human engineering, right? We must have selectively bred them for floppy ears because we thought it was cute. But here is the thing, we didn't. Friendliness physically melts the body. And we know this because of one of the most astonishing, legendary scientific experiments ever conducted. We are jumping from the Ice Age to the Soviet Union in the 1950s. A geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev went to Siberia. He wanted to understand how wolves became dogs, but he didn't have 30,000 years to wait. So he used a cousin of the wolf, the wild silver fox. Belyaev took dozens of wild, aggressive foxes from fur farms. They were terrifying. If you put your hand near the cage, they would try to bite your fingers off. Standard wild predator behavior. Belyaev established one strict, unbreakable rule for his experiment. He would only breed the foxes based on a single trait: friendliness. When the foxes had cubs, the researchers tested them. The ones that bit and snarled were removed from the breeding pool. The ones that showed even a tiny bit less fear, the ones that tolerated a human hand for just a second longer, were allowed to breed. They did not select for fur color. They did not select for ear shape. Only friendliness. Within just a handful of generations, something absolutely impossible began to happen. The foxes didn't just stop biting, their bodies began to warp. By the 10th generation, foxes were being born with floppy ears that never stood up. Their tails, which were originally straight, started to curl up over their backs. Their coats, which had been solid silver, started breaking out in random white spots and patches, what geneticists call a piebald coat. Their snouts got shorter, their teeth got smaller, they started whining and barking, sounds wild adult foxes rarely make. And when they saw the researchers, they started wagging their tails. They were turning into dogs right in front of the scientists' eyes. This phenomenon is now known as domestication syndrome. When you breed an animal purely for friendliness, you are essentially breeding for lower adrenaline. Adrenaline is part of the same biochemical pathway that controls melanin, which determines hair color, and cartilage development, which determines whether an ear stands up or flops down. The ancient humans did not breed the wolf to look cute. The wolf chose to be friendly to get the food, and as the fear drained out of its biology over thousands of years, its aggressive, terrifying wolf body literally melted away, leaving behind the soft, floppy, spotted, tail-wagging creature we recognize today. The physical form of the dog is literally the biological shape of diminished fear. Okay, that is settled. Now forget everything I just said, because this is where the story takes a sharp turn. If you think this was just a one-way street, that the wolf changed into a dog and the human just sat by the fire tossing scraps, you are missing the biggest plot twist in the history of our species. We didn't just change them, they changed us. They altered human evolution. Around 2015, the anthropologist Pat Shipman put forward a theory that makes you look at your dog with profound awe. It is called the wolf-dog hypothesis. Let's go back to the Ice Age. Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, were not the only humans around. We were sharing the continent with the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were stronger than us, they had bigger brains than us, and they had been surviving in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years before we even showed up. So why are we here, and why are they extinct? For decades, scientists argued about climate change, or weapons, or disease. But Shipman looked at the archaeological record and noticed a glaring coincidence. Right around the time Homo sapiens started forming deep bonds with early proto-dogs, the Neanderthals started disappearing. Neanderthals did not have dogs. They hunted up close, stabbing mammoths with heavy spears. It was incredibly dangerous, high-casualty work. But Homo sapiens had a new technology, a living technology. We had a hunting partner that could run twice as fast as us, track the scent of an animal across miles of frozen tundra, and corner the prey. The early dog was the biological equivalent of radar and a guided missile rolled into one. The dog tracked and cornered the prey. The human threw the spear from a safe distance. Both of them shared the meat. Suddenly, Homo sapiens were getting massive amounts of calories with very little risk. Our populations exploded. We outcompeted the Neanderthals not because we were smarter, but because we had formed a superorganism. Two completely different apex predators, combining their evolutionary superpowers into a single, unstoppable unit. Shipman even suggests this is why human eyes look the way they do. We are the only primates with highly visible white sclera around our pupils. Other apes have dark eyes to hide where they are looking. We evolved bright white eyes so that our hunting dogs could easily track our gaze in silence. The dog is not our invention. The dog is the reason we survived the cold. But here is the part we do not like to talk about. And now I have to tell you the other side of this. Because we look at this story, the self-domestication, the oxytocin, the cooperative hunting, and it sounds like a Disney movie. A beautiful, voluntary friendship between man and beast. But there is a dark shadow stretching behind that firelight. And this is where it stops being a cute story about evolution and becomes a chilling story about human power. Survival of the friendliest is a neat scientific phrase, but what does it actually mean in practice? What happened to the ones that were not quite friendly enough? We know that early dogs were living in human camps, but these were still animals in transition. They still had the blood and the instincts of the grey wolf running through their veins. Imagine an ancient human camp, 50 or 100 generations into this process. A proto-dog is sleeping near the fire. It is useful for hunting. But one day, a human toddler trips and falls near the dog's food. The dog acts like a wolf. It snaps. It growls. Maybe it bites. What do the humans do? They don't call a behavioral therapist. They don't send the dog to a rescue shelter to live out its days on a farm. They take a rock or a heavy wooden club and they kill it on the spot. And they didn't just do this once. Estimates based on the genetic bottlenecks of early dogs suggest this culling process happened over at least 10 to 15,000 years. Hundreds upon hundreds of generations of systematic, brutal execution. If a proto-dog showed resource guarding, it was killed. If it showed food aggression, it was killed. If it didn't listen, if it challenged a human for dominance, if it growled at a child, it was killed. We carved the modern dog out of the wild wolf, but the chisel we used was death. We built a bloody, invisible filter around our camps. To pass through the filter and pass on your genes, you had to surrender your wildness completely. You had to suppress everything that made you a wolf. You had to accept that the frail, hairless ape was the absolute master of your universe, and if you ever forgot that fact, your life was forfeit. We think of domestication as a gift we gave them, a warm fire and a steady supply of food. But the price of that fire was the total biological submission of their species to ours. And the ones that survived that brutal filter are the ones sitting in our homes today. The dogs that will let a toddler pull their ears. The dogs that will let you take a bone straight out of their mouth without snapping. We bred the danger out of them by murdering the dangerous ones. Sit with that for a second. The absolute vulnerability of the dog you love is the result of thousands of years of human ruthlessness. They love us because we eradicated the ones that didn't. And this is where the weight of the story really hits you. We look at our pets and we project our own human emotions onto them. We buy them birthday cakes, we dress them in raincoats, we talk to them like they are fuzzy humans who just haven't learned to speak English yet. We treat them like children because, biologically, they hacked our brains to make us feel that way. But the honest answer is, we don't know what it feels like to be a dog. Science can describe the oxytocin loop, it can map the genetic shift from the silver foxes, it can dig up the bones of Neanderthals, but science cannot crawl inside the mind of the animal looking up at you from the rug. We don't know if there is an echo of the Ice Age still howling somewhere deep in their subconscious when they hear a siren in the distance. We don't know exactly what they sacrificed to cross the boundary line into our world. But maybe that is exactly what makes the whole thing so profoundly beautiful. Yes, the history of domestication is built on a foundation of brutal survival and ruthless selection. It was the Ice Age. Everything was brutal. Death was the baseline of existence. But out of that frozen, violent darkness, an impossible treaty was forged. We were a lonely, vulnerable ape, shivering in the cold, surrounded by monsters. They were a fierce, hungry predator, wandering the freezing forests, trying to find a meal. And somehow, across the vast biological chasm that separates species, we found each other. We traded scraps of meat for their keen senses. They traded their wild freedom for the warmth of our fires. We walked out of the Ice Age side by side. We shaped their bodies with our camps, and they shaped our brains with their eyes. We are not their masters, and they are not our slaves. We are two species of survivors who looked at the terrifying, pitch-black universe and decided we were better off facing it together. Look at your dog. Right now, seriously, look at it. Maybe it is lying on the couch, snoring softly. Maybe it is chewing on a plastic squeaky toy that looks like a hot dog. It is the most ordinary, domestic, mundane scene in the world. No Netflix, no phone, no existential dread. Just a pet in a living room. But look closer. Look at the shape of those ears, molded by the slow drain of adrenaline over 30,000 years. Look at the eyes, tracking you, flooding your brain with chemical love, a trick learned at the edge of a frozen campfire. It is the same dog on the same couch. But now you know what is behind those eyes. The echo of the deep, wild dark, and the longest, most successful treaty in the history of the Earth. The wolf didn't just come in from the cold. It built the modern world with us. If you've got a dog, go scratch behind its ear right now. And tell me in the comments, do you think someone wild is still looking back at you in there? I read these. And if you want to keep looking at the ordinary things in your life and seeing the absolute abyss of wonder hiding behind them, hit subscribe. Stay curious, stay kind, and I'll see you down the next rabbit hole.